Okay, great. So, good evening, everyone. It's so nice to have you here tonight and to be amongst company like you all with a shared love for monarch butterflies. My name is Brenna Marsichek. I'm the Director of Outreach with Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance. And SOBA, the short way of saying that big long name of Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance is SOBA. We have the pleasure of co-hosting this event tonight with SOS Save Our Songbirds, the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Monarch Collaborative, and Journey North. So nice big group of butterfly fans. This is our final evening for the Mighty Migrations webinar series. So this series focuses on tiny animals that make epic long migrations and focuses on the biology and the migration and the different conservation needs of each of those species. So on Monday, we started with the rambunctious and beautiful ruby-throated hummingbird, which migrates 2,000 miles or so each spring and fall. Yesterday evening, we took a closer look at chimney swifts, which make an amazing 6,000-mile migration each spring and fall. And we learned about the swift NATO behavior that they do in fall, especially. And tonight we are delighted to learn from one of the world's experts on monarch butterflies. So each of these presentations are recorded.
No, it's muted.
I'm going to go ahead and mute a line. So each of these presentations are recorded. So if you miss them and you want to be able to see them, I'll put a link in the chat just after I'm finished here that has the recordings available to you. And you can share those with your friends and family as well.
Hey, good.
Looking good.
Well, I'll just say I'm Karen Oberhauser. It's really wonderful to see all of you. I just feel like I'm in a room with so many friends. I know a lot of you, so I really appreciate. I might get teary. All of you here tonight. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm honored that you're all here. We're talking about monarch biology and conservation. I have been studying monarch butterflies since I started my PhD research in 1984. So that's a good long time. Now I have to do the math to figure out how many years it is, and I won't do that in front of you, but a long time. And I do love monarchs. It's been a really wonderful ride with them. But I'm going to start by talking about insects in general, because for those of you who have been here for the other two talks, which were amazing, I was at both of them, insects were mentioned, but they were mentioned because birds eat them. And that was the big thing that everyone said about why insects are important. And I want to just start by telling you that any insect in the world, there are over 1 million, probably up to 10 million kinds of insects. We really have no idea. Every year more insects are discovered, but every single one of them is probably just almost as interesting as monarchs. So I'm just going to tell you a tiny bit about insects before we get started on monarchs. So insects are a class, just like mammals are a class. So we're in the class Mammalia. Insects are in the class Insecta. There are about 30 orders, depending if you're a lumper or a splitter. And what's really cool about insects orders is they're often named after their wings. So here are some names of insect orders that I really love. There's Orthoptera, which are the grasshoppers and crickets, and they're named because they have straight wings. Like when you go to the orthodontist, they're straightening your teeth. So that's Orthoptera. And then my very favorite scientific name for an insect is Ephemeroptera, which is the mayflies. And they're named that because they are only adults for about 1 day. So they're very, very ephemeral. So we call them ephemeral wings. And if you've ever been around when a mayfly hatch is occurring, it's just incredible to see all the mayflies in the air. So the picture I have for you there is a pair of mayflies mating in their short 1 day of life. And then that female is going to fly off and lay eggs. And the last one is probably not an insect that you maybe even recognize, or if you do, you probably don't like it. It's a earwig, which is named because people used to think they would get in your ears which I've never heard of that actually happening, but anyway, they're called earwigs, and their scientific name is Dermoptera, which is because their wings are kind of like skin. So take a picture, take a look at that earwig right there on the right, and then I'm going to try something that's a little scary, but I'm going to try to share a video with you. And after this video, I am hoping that you fall in love with earwigs. So even though this talk is not about earwigs, do you see my screen of a YouTube video? All
Yeah, we
right,
can see it.
great. So
Blended beetle.
So
And
this
it's
is
about
a
to show you
blue
what may
beetle.
rightly
It's
be
not an
considered
earwig.
nature's most complicated pair of
I'll
folding
just shut up
wings.
here for a minute.
They're usually kept folded up to a fraction of their size underneath the small protective forewings or elytra. But when the beetle's ready to fly, they pop them out, flap them open, and take to the sky. Here's a second look at how they're deployed. When they initially come out, in this footage, you can see at least 5 different points at which the wings are folded over on themselves. The only other insect that rivals what these rogue beetles are doing are these earwigs. This is a shore earwig I filmed several years ago, and as it shakes out its enormous wings, you can see how they employ a couple of large flat folds mixed with a series of fan or accordion-like folds. Interestingly, both of these insects can live and be found in similar environments, scurrying through the leaf litter and squeezing under rocks and logs where a big exposed pair of wings would only get in the way. So in dealing with that, they both come to employ extremely compactable and expandable wings. Seeing an insect unfold its wings and use them to fly is really cool, and getting a roe beetle to do it on camera has been a goal of mine for a long time. But with the roe beetle and the earwig, what's even more impressive to see is how they fold up their wings and store them away. And luckily, now I've got footage of both of them doing just that. I only got this footage by capturing and filming these insects immediately after they flew to a black light at night. Both the earwig and the roe beetle were species I caught in central and southern Florida using a light trap setup like the one you see here. So here's what that wing folding looks like for a roe beetle. They use their abdomen to push the wings to the side to perform the first few folds. The wings fold together as a single unit, but asymmetrically, each in a different orientation than the other. The second push of the abdomen is from behind and starts to cram the wings underneath the elytra. The third push is swinging the abdomen back to the side and folding the wings so that the tips point sideways relative to the body. The fourth and fifth push that this one does complete the last few folds that finish up putting the wings underneath the elytra and out of harm's way. Now compare that to what the earwig does. This segment isn't in reverse. This one is actually able to fold away its wings without touching them. Now, while earwig wings are bigger and have more folds than roe beetles, you can see how these wings fold up independent of each other and symmetrically. They also don't completely soar away underneath the elytra. With the roe beetles, another impressive aspect is that their asymmetry in folding is not in the same direction every time. An individual beetle can fold its wings up by starting to push on them from either side, because each wing has 2 sets of folding patterns built into it. In the 2 slow motion folding segments you've seen here, it only took the beetles 1.2 and 1.4 seconds to perform all these folds and store away their wings. I should also point out that roe beetles are one of our most diverse groups of animals, with over 60,000 different species. Within that group, they've evolved some.
All right. So, don't you love earwigs now? I hope that you change your opinion of earwigs after seeing that. Okay, now we're going to go back to monarchs. But anyway, just insects are just so amazing. And like I said, every kind of insect you see has its own just amazing story. So that little video was by a guy at the North Carolina Natural History Museum named Adrian Smith, who's, as you can tell, really good at filming insects. Okay, so tonight we're going to focus on another order, Lepidoptera. And Lepidoptera are also named for their wings. It means scaly wings. And butterflies are in the group with moths because their wings are covered with scales. And I'm going to tell you, my presentation tonight is kind of dotted through with pictures of my family. That's my grandson, Frank, there, looking at that butterfly. All right, and I'm going to start just by saying that my career since 1984 has had just really amazing people that I've collaborated with. So what I'm telling you tonight is the combination of what I've learned from many, many people over the years. So I've collaborated in the upper right or upper left with lots and lots of amazing scientists. We've studied monarchs together in amazing places all over the world. Some of you are here that I've studied with. So I would just like to thank all the people I've interacted with scientifically over my career. I spent most of my career at the University of Minnesota, where I had amazing students and staff members in my lab. So the upper right picture is my last group of students and staff before I left Minnesota in 2017 to come to the amazing Arboretum at the University of Wisconsin. And this is the team that I worked with at the University of Wisconsin, where I learned so much about land care and environmental education and research. So that was an amazing group too. And finally, I want to thank citizen scientists who have collected data on monarchs throughout North America. People are collecting data on every stage of the monarch life cycle. And without them, we would not know the things that I'm going to be telling you about today. So the two people in this slide are my parents, Pete and Sandy Oberhauser, who were some of the first monarch citizen scientists. So in a program called the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, which I'll tell you about today. So some of you know either my mom or my dad, and there they are in that picture. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about basic monarch biology. So I call this Monarch Biology 101. The scientific name for monarchs is Danaus plexippus, but I'll just say monarchs. And just to let you know that we will have a curated question and answer session after this part of the talk. So if you have any questions while I'm talking, just drop them in the chat box and Brenna's going to collate those and ask them to me. So as soon as they come up in your brain, you should type them in the chat box and she'll answer ones that are quick and easy, and we'll talk about them all together for more complicated ones. And there are going to be times that I'm going to be asking you questions and you'll be able to type your answers. So you can type both questions and answers in the chat box. Okay, so monarchs have what we call complete metamorphosis in insects. That means they go through 4 very different life stages. They start life as an egg. This is what an egg looks like, and our monitoring team found some eggs at the Arboretum today. They're an egg under normal summer conditions for 4 to 5 days. They usually lay eggs on the underside of milkweed leaves. So there's a picture of what the egg looks like. They're absolutely gorgeous. The egg hatches into a caterpillar, and they're a caterpillar for 9 to 13 days. Again, under normal summer conditions, can take longer if it's cooler. Doesn't get a lot faster than that, but it can take a lot longer than that if it's cool. And we're going to talk more about the different stages of monarch caterpillars a little later on. So you can just see how much they grow. I will tell you right now that if you look at the little egg, this is an egg up here in the top, this white dot. If you look at that, a little caterpillar hatches out of that fits inside that egg. In about 10 days, it gets to be this big. And during that amount of time, it increases its body mass 2,000 times in 10 days. So think of your 7-pound babies that some of you probably had at some point in your lives, and imagine them growing 2,000 times in 10 days. They would weigh 14,000 pounds in 10 days. So just an amazing rate of growth. They change from a caterpillar into a pupa. That's the 3rd stage of their life. The pupa is beautiful. And if you're raising them, like I did a lot when I was a researcher, that's the easiest stage to work with, the pupa, because they just hang there. Very beautiful. They're a pupa for about the same amount of time they're a caterpillar. Then they're an adult. And they're an adult, so the adult emerges out of the pupa. If they're a summertime adult, they live 2 to 6 weeks. And if they're a butterfly that's emerging now, they'll live 8 to 10 months. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about those very different lifespans for the adults. So this is the whole life cycle. What they need during this time is milkweed. So the caterpillars only eat milkweed. There are over 100 species of milkweed that are native to North America. And I've just picked a few of them to show you with a map kind of illustrating. We divide the country up into sections, and different species of milkweed are native to different sections of the country. If you're from the upper Midwest, you're very familiar, I'm sure, with common milkweed. You might be familiar with swamp milkweed, butterfly weed. I'm not sure how many people we have from the desert Southwest, specifically Arizona. But this is a super cool kind of milkweed. It does not have leaves, or it has little tiny leaves. And the caterpillars, this is called desert milkweed. The caterpillars eat the stems. Now, this is not a monarch caterpillar. This is a queen, closely related to monarchs. But monarchs eat this milkweed too, and all they do is eat those stems. So that's a really cool kind of milkweed. But incredible variety in the flower color and shape. They all have the same basic structure of 5 parts to the flowers, but there's incredible variety, and they're beautiful, beautiful plants to have in your gardens. Okay, so now is your first time to answer questions. Anybody, and I guess I can't even see the chat. So if you could tell me in the chat box, if you know which of these 2 butterflies is a male. Is the male the one on the right or the left of your screen? And I'm just gonna I'll just let you guess there for a while. Oh, I can see the chat. Oh, good. Steve knew it. Good. Right. Male on the right, male on the right. Very good. You guys are good. Everyone's saying the right answer. Very good. So if we were in a room together, I'd make you tell me why, but it sounds like a lot of people know this. We know that this is a male on the right because of these dots on his wings. So you can see this little black dot right here. The female doesn't have that. Now, I really don't like describing females as missing something that males have. So we can look at other differences here. The female it looks like she has wider wing veins. See that? It looks like the males are really skinny. It's not that she has wider veins. It's just that she has more dark scales on top of her veins. And she also has a few more darker scales mixed in with the orange in these cells on her wings. So there are other differences besides these dots, but these are the things that I bet most of you looked at. So good job on that one. All right, so the adults, unlike the caterpillars, the adults have a very broad diet. They can eat nectar from a lot of different flowers. So my screen is frozen here. There we go. Here we have a picture of monarchs on many different flowers. And I'm going to ask you, this is a harder question right here than what's the male and the female. There's one flower in this group that doesn't really fit in. And it's not because it's the black-eyed Susan that's yellow and all the others are purple. So there's one thing, if you look at all these flowers, that one of the flowers is different. I'm going to see if anyone knows this. This is a really, really hard question. Oh my gosh, people know it. The lilac, the lilac. Okay. Oh, and Marilyn, thank you for your really good answers to this question. So I wish that we were all in the room together, but I'm going to just call on Steve, because Steve, you really are at the top of my question. Can you unmute Steve and tell me why the lilac doesn't fit in with these other flowers?
It doesn't appear to have visible and accessible nectar tube.
Okay, that's not what I was looking for, but that it could be a difference. The lilac, although monarchs go to it a lot, so I think it probably has nectar. Anyone else want to unmute and say why they picked the lilac, Nancy? Or there's another difference besides what Steve said.
Janet Wood? Is it because it's non-native?
Yes, the lilac is the only one up here that's non-native. So really good. Whoever answered that question was Nancy. Good job. So the lilac is the only non-native. So a lot of, I'm a big proponent of native flowers, but I also like non-native ones too. So that's great. And then somebody here said, somebody named Marilyn Starzewski, thank you for seeing this, the bee balm. So you know your flowers and your butterflies, Marilyn. The one in the upper right is not a monarch. So I fooled you. The one in the upper right is a viceroy. And you can see that it has these extra stripes on its wings. It's a monarch mimic. So it's on purpose. It looks like monarchs are not on purpose, but it's evolved to look like monarchs because monarchs are toxic because they eat milkweed. So this is a classic example of mimicry in wild, where birds and other predators learn that monarchs taste bad, then they don't eat viceroys either. So that is a viceroy, that one butterfly that looks like a monarch and isn't. All right, good. You guys are good. All right. So that was the life cycle. So during that life cycle, monarchs need plants. They need milkweed and nectar plants. And hopefully you have in your head now that they can get nectar from a whole bunch of different kinds of flowers. Monarchs also have an annual migratory cycle. So I think of it as their life cycle and then their annual cycle. So we're going to walk through the annual cycle of monarchs starting now. So any monarch that emerged in the northern part of the country after about August 15th, and it varies a little bit with latitude, but that's a good number to keep in your head. So August 15th is when monarchs start emerging as adults that will not mate and lay eggs right away, but they'll migrate to Mexico. So the first stage of this annual cycle is migrating south. And this is happening starting now through about mid-November. And as they're migrating south, they're in a reproductive state that we call diapause. They're not able to reproduce yet. Their reproductive organs aren't developed. So we call it, it's like they're putting a pause on their development. So they're migrating south, they're nectaring on flowers. They stop at roost sites. This is a mesquite tree in Texas. So this is a roosting site where monarchs are gathering together at night. We're going to talk a little bit more about those later. But basically, monarchs are following these paths, or they're just like a sweep of monarchs going down, heading to Mexico. And there's another population of monarchs that's west of the Rocky Mountains. We won't talk very much about those tonight. They're roughly, but not completely, divided by the Rocky Mountains. Some of those monarchs do migrate to the overwintering sites in Mexico, but most of them go to sites along the coast of California. So that's a somewhat separate population of monarchs. But by far, the vast majority of monarchs in the world right now are heading south towards Mexico. Okay, so those monarchs head south. It takes them over 2 months to make that journey. And these monarchs weigh about as much as a paper clip, the little kind of paper clip like this. That's how much a monarch weighs, this paper clip. And so they're migrating this incredibly long distance, thousands of miles, ending up in overwintering sites in central Mexico. So they're ending up at the end of this arrow. And basically what they do in these overwintering sites in Mexico is hang out for the winter for several months. From early in November, they'll start arriving. They stay there through about mid-March. And most of the time they just hang out in the trees. Sometimes they fly around, but mostly they're just saving up their energy. So as they've been flying south, they nectar, they build up fat reserves. They use some of the fat reserves from when they were caterpillars, and they just live on those reserves like penguins do. They live on those reserves all winter long. So that's the second stage of their annual cycle, overwintering. It's the very same monarchs. Monarch that you see up here right now is going to go all the way to Mexico, stay there until mid-March. So that's why they have to live so long. And then those monarchs fly off to the northeast, like that animation. They fly off, and those very same monarchs, so we're still on those monarchs that left here, recolonize the southern part of the country. So they get up into the United States and they're laying eggs the whole way. They find milkweed in Mexico, and they do, as Rocio Trevino, who's here today, knows. She lives in Saltillo, Mexico. She'll see eggs down here in Mexico. Those same butterflies fly up. They spent the whole winter down there. They get up here, and then their life is over. So they don't make it all the way back to the north. So this is the part, this lasts from about mid-March through May, that those butterflies are flying back, then their life is over. Then their offspring, so the first new generation of the year, is what we get back in sort of the northeastern quarter of the country. So these monarchs come back here, and these are the non-migratory monarchs. They do fly, and they'll move, and they get a little bit of northern movement, but it's not like they spend their whole life moving in one direction. They don't have directional flight. And they go through 2 to 3 non-migratory generations. So during this time, the population is building up. They're laying eggs on milkweed plants, but they're not migratory. And then the cycle starts again. And the last generation of the year heads back to Mexico. So this is their whole annual cycle that you can kind of think of in 4 parts. Migrating south, that's what's happening now. Overwintering in Mexico, migrating north, but not getting all the way back, not like a bird that gets all the way back. And then that generation, then we go through these non-migratory breeding generations. And one of the reasons that we know so much about how monarchs are doing is because most of them are gathered together in these overwintering sites in the wintertime, and we can measure how the population is doing. In Mexico, we measure the area that's covered with trees, covered with monarchs. We don't count the individual monarchs, we measure the area. In California, for the Western population, people actually do count the butterflies. There are a lot fewer out there than end up in Mexico. There are millions in Mexico. So that's the annual cycle. And if we think of that cycle in pictures rather than a map, we can think of what monarchs need during that whole annual cycle. So let's start over here on the left. As they're migrating, they need nectar. They actually gain weight when they're migrating. And most of the time when they're migrating, they soar instead of using powered flight. Powered flight is flapping their wings, but monarchs soar. They're using air currents, so they don't use so much energy to migrate. So they rest at night. They don't migrate at nighttime. So I love this picture because there's a monarch flying onto this tree and joining its buddies as they're all migrating south, getting nectar. In Mexico, like I said, their job is just to stay alive. They just need to stay alive until the next spring. So these butterflies have not reproduced yet. They haven't kind of fulfilled their biological goal, which is to have as many offspring as possible. So most of the time, like I said, they're hanging in trees, but they will fly up. And some people think that they fly up, like if the sun hits them, it gets really warm. Some people think that they're kind of exercising their mitochondria. We don't really know, but they are not, it's sort of like hibernation, but not quite, because they can be woken up from this hibernating state. Then as they're moving north, they get nectar. Here we have our non-native lilac here. They're basically moving north with milkweed. So I always know in Wisconsin and Minnesota, when I start seeing milkweed coming up, I know that I'm going to see monarchs pretty soon. So they're just moving north. with that milkweed. This picture was taken in Oklahoma. Then they get up here. I say here because this is where I am in Wisconsin. Go through these 2 to 3 generations. The population builds and builds and builds, we hope. And they need nectar and they need milkweed during this time. So this is a cycle, and every single part of this cycle is like a chain. It's only as strong as its weakest link. So if any part of this doesn't work, the whole population would collapse, because no life stage of monarchs can survive winter. If you look at most insects you see around here in the summertime, most of them stay here in the winter, and some life stage can stand our freezing temperatures, but no life stage of monarchs can stand, so they have to leave. So they can't, if we lose these Mexican overwintering sites, we lose their ability to migrate, we lose monarchs. So I studied monarchs for 10 years up in the north before I went to Mexico for the first time. So I would look at these monarchs when I go to Mexico, and I would see each individual monarch in a tree and think every single one of those monarchs has an amazing story to tell. And most of those stories, it's an incredible story. They survived being an egg and a caterpillar. They survived that long migration, and they ended up in Mexico. But the beginning of most of those stories is in the upper Midwest on a milkweed plant. So we're kind of the basis of this whole story. Not very many monarchs survive this. Only about 5% of them make it to become an adult from an egg. So it really is, each one of those butterflies is its own little individual miracle that made it all that way. Okay, so I said a little bit about the importance of citizen scientists, and this is a really busy slide. The point is, there's a long list of programs on the right. We're not going to talk about all of them. You say, whew, she's not going to talk about all those programs. There's a lot of them. And these are programs where people are collecting data that help us learn more about monarchs. The top programs up to this Weber, Minnesota monitoring site look at all kinds of butterflies, and all the bottom ones are just people looking at monarchs. And I've sort of divided, like I did that annual cycle. We've got people looking at monarchs throughout the whole thing. And I'm going to just tell you about 3 of these that I've bolded over here. Journey North, which is it was housed for a while at the UW-Madison Arboretum. It's now part of the Monarch joint venture. The Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, which is co-run by the UW-Madison Arboretum and the Monarch joint venture, and Monarch Watch, which is run out of the University of Kansas. And I'm going to tell you about the MLMP and Journey North. And Brenna, hopefully Brenna's got her slide, her connection working again, is going to tell you about Monarch Watch. Okay, so Journey North. If you ever see monarchs, you can participate in Journey North. This is a program that tracks monarchs all year, but it mostly focuses on the spring migration and the fall migration. And it has a sister program in Mexico called Correo Real, which was started by Rocio Trevino, who is actually with us today. So I'm sure that these Mexican sightings come from Rocio's program. They're combined with Journey North sightings. So each of these dots on the map is somebody seeing their first monarch of the year. And they report it to this website, journeynorth.org, and we can track the monarchs as they move north. And the darker the green colors get, the later in the spring it is. So you see these light green colors in the southeast. Those are the monarchs that have come back from Mexico. And then the darker colors up here are the offspring of those butterflies that move north. So you can bet that I'm looking really closely at this map every spring, waiting for monarchs to come back to wherever I am. And what's really fun is that each one of these dots that has a little white square in it has a picture. So I just picked one of these, and I like this one because this is way up in Saskatchewan, Canada. And this person named Russell, this guy, Russell, saw this butterfly on a showy milkweed plant he saw his first butterfly on July 7th. So you can just see them moving north, filling in that whole breeding range. And you can click on any one of these dots. This isn't live, so I can't do that. But I picked that one because it was so far north and such a wonderful picture. So there's Russell, and he knew it was a male nectaring on showy milkweed. So you report your first monarch, and you can submit a picture or not if you want. Journey North also is going on right now with people reporting their fall roost sites. I looked at where they are. They only have a couple roost sites reported so far this year. So here I'm showing you last fall. But each one of these dots represents a clump of monarchs that have gathered together in a tree as they're moving south to Mexico. So you can kind of see their pathway going south, again with the lighter colors earlier. And I picked one of these to show you from Iowa. I don't know if we have anyone in Iowa, but here's a picture that somebody took in Gilman, Iowa. And they estimated about 200 monarchs on their property in Gilman, Iowa. So if you're lucky enough, actually, you could just type into the chat. If you've ever seen one of these fall roost sites, it's really amazing. We see them at the Arboretum. I've seen several of them, but it's an amazing thing to see these monarchs. And you just think, oh, here they are starting this long, long journey. So this guy saw this in September. They've got a long ways to go from Iowa to Mexico. All right, so that's Journey North. So you can all do that program. It's super easy. A little bit harder, but fun one that we started at the University of Minnesota in 1996. It's called the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. I have a map here that shows you monarch larva monitoring projects all over the country. And these are specific sites where people are going out to look at eggs and caterpillars. So the site can be a garden, a park. So here's somebody's garden that has milkweed growing in it, a park, a roadside, a big old prairie, anything as long as it has milkweed. And then people describe their site. Is it a garden? How big is it? What kind of milkweed species grow there? How many of them grow there? So they provide information about their site. What's the surrounding land like? And then they go out once a week, which Steve and I did this morning, and monitor they look at as many milkweed plants as they can. So what people do is, like these two little kids who have an advantage because the milkweed is about as tall as them. It's harder when you're tall to look at milkweed plants, but they go out, look at milkweed plants. It's really fun to do in a group. It's really fun to do by yourself. And you get these amazing rewards of peeking under a milkweed leaf and seeing a caterpillar. And we keep track of how monarchs are doing throughout the year. And if people want to, they don't have to register their site. If people are on vacation and see a site, they can do a non-site report. So we have great data. And I'm just going to show you what we're learning about monarchs from this project. So we're documenting breeding. We're documenting eggs and caterpillars. We report the adults that we see, but mostly we're looking at eggs and caterpillars. So here's kind of a typical graph of what we get. So this is Wisconsin. We're in Wisconsin, so I picked that state. This is from 2023. And this graph is showing us monarchs across the season. And what we see, we have this is called a stacked bar graph. The X or the Y axis on this graph is monarchs per milkweed plant. So like this 0.05 for right here, 521 means people for about every 100 plants they looked at, they saw 5, and the blue means eggs. So they saw 5 eggs, maybe 6 for every 100 plants. This is throughout Wisconsin. And then the different colors on here are the different stages of caterpillars. So I said I would describe this to you. So here we have the egg, little tiny egg about the size of a pinhead. Out of the egg hatches a first instar. And that's represented on this graph by this kind of orangey color. And then that molts and becomes a second instar. That molts and becomes a third, and then a fourth and a fifth. So our volunteers need to be able to tell the difference between these different stages of monarchs. So here we have all the different stages. One thing you see here is that most of the eggs don't become caterpillars, because there's a lot more blue on this graph than other colors. There's all sorts of things out there eating the caterpillars. So most of them don't make it. So we can tell from these graphs what kind of a year it is. So this was 2012, and anyone who studies insects remembers 2012. It was a really weird year. First of all, look at the y-axis, totally different scale, like an order of magnitude different, goes up to 2 instead of 0.3. And the monarchs came back early. So here in April, people were starting to see monarchs. Usually it's not till the middle of May. They came back really early. There were so many of them. It was monarchs everywhere. Every single plant you looked at had eggs on it. And then the population crashed. So look at the difference between these two patterns. So in 2012, their population ends up being lower than it did in 2023. Started out really high. That was a hot, dry summer. Those of us who watch butterflies, that was the year that Carner blue butterflies disappeared from Minnesota, from Indiana. We still have them in Wisconsin, but it was a really bad year for butterflies. It was so hot and dry. So here's what's going on this year. This is 2025 over here. There's the 2 years that I showed you. This year is stacking up pretty well. We have pretty high numbers in the second peak. So I should tell you that the first peak on here is the eggs laid by the first butterflies coming back from the south. Then those butterflies die off. We get a low point in June. So that always happens. We get a low point in June, and then usually it goes up again. So we're pretty good this year. We had a pretty high middle of the summer. Of course, we're not to the end of it yet, but this year was kind of a weird year. Usually we have kind of a typical bell curve here of these butterflies. This looks more like an even hump. And you see this really low number in early June, another low number in July. What happened in those weeks is it rained a lot, and monarchs can't lay eggs when it's raining. So we see what's going on with the monarch population from these graphs. All right, I'm going to stop now. If there aren't questions, that's okay. We don't have to worry, but I'm just going to ask Brenna. This is kind of my end of talking about monarch biology. So we can answer some questions now.
Great. And there are questions.
All right.
Let me just get to one of them here. And they're great questions. So Paul asked, this time of year, we have a number of monarchs in our garden, and at times 3 or 4 fly around and seem to bump into one another. What are they doing?
Yeah, so there are a couple things that could be happening. Now you know the difference between males and females. It might be males that are still reproductive and are trying to catch a female to mate with. So that's one possibility, is the males, if you see kind of this spiraling up flight, one of them will be flying around and then it sees another one and they fly up. That's the male trying to mate with the female. They sometimes will bump into each other if there's one particularly attractive plant or like a flower that they're going to, but they definitely interact. And usually that's mating behavior, or not actual mating behavior. If they're mating, they're actually together, but it could be a male chasing a female.
Okay, chase is on. Jim asks, what biology triggers migration? Is it the day length or temperature?
Great question. It's mostly day length and the angle of the sun in the sky, just like the birds that we learned about in the last 2 days. So they're cueing into a reliable cue in their environment, which is day length. But also with monarchs, there's sort of an additive effect of temperature. So if you think of August, we still have pretty warm days in August, but nights tend to be cooler. So it's actually the difference between day temperature and night temperature that is another thing that triggers both diapause and the migration, and host plant quality. So the plants are starting to senesce and get old and scuzzy right now. So all those things added together trigger the migration and diapause. Great question.
Lots of different cues. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll go into this in your next part, but what is unique to the Mexican mountains that monarchs overwinter in? Is it possible that they could overwinter elsewhere, like southern Texas?
Yeah, super good question. And I sort of skipped over that. What my slides showed you is what most monarchs do. So there are monarchs that don't do that. And every winter, there are monarchs that are breeding along the Gulf of Mexico coast and through Texas and other states along the Gulf Coast. So there are some that stay here and breed. They never could all do that. There wouldn't be enough milkweed for them. So that wouldn't be a strategy that the whole population could do. So the overwintering sites in Mexico have a very unique microclimate. It's a perfect humidity and temperature for them that allows them to live for that long time. So basically, it's kind of like they're going to a refrigerator, not a freezer, but it's cool at those overwintering sites in Mexico. So it slows down their metabolism. Plus, they're not reproducing. So that slows their metabolism too. But that's what allows them to live for that exceptionally long time. So those conditions, if you do like a microclimate analysis of Mexico, those conditions are pretty unique. So yeah, they're going to where they need to go to stay alive.
And you don't think that with climate change that microclimate could be replicated elsewhere?
Yeah, Barbara Kingsolver's book, Flight Behavior Notwithstanding.
Yeah.
Probably no. So probably what would happen if we lost those Mexican overwintering sites, if it warmed up, their conditions weren't right, then there would still be monarchs that would probably overwinter along the Gulf Coast. Although the problem with that is, like happened this year, sometimes it freezes. So that's not the greatest strategy for them. A lot of monarchs that didn't go all the way to Mexico died this year. But in my opinion, what would probably happen if we lost those sites is we would see monarchs surviving, staying and breeding along the Gulf Coast because they couldn't live long enough to overwinter. It's too warm. So they would just breed. They would fly down there, breed, and come back, but the population would be a lot smaller than it is now.
Okay, that makes sense. Steve asks, do the individuals at a roost site migrate together?
We don't know. That is such a good question. And I have colleagues who have tried to figure it out. It would be a hard question to answer. I don't think so, but it would, yeah, we don't know. Good question. A mystery.
Okay.
It's not like though they're learning from each other and they're kind of migrating separately.
Okay. There are quite a few questions about whether raising caterpillars is helpful or harmful, or if it's done, how to do it in a way that's good. And maybe you'll go into this a little bit later.
I'm not going to, and that is like a whole separate talk. I give a whole talk on that. What I'm going to do is share a link to a handout that the Monarch joint venture has, and I'll answer it really briefly. Raising monarchs is not the way to save them because we would just be raising monarchs, and I will talk about the things that are causing declining numbers in monarchs. We would just be releasing them back out into a world where their numbers are declining. So the way to really help them is make that world better for them. So that said, I let go. I raise, a couple dozen monarchs every year. I let my last monarch go today. I was going to keep it to show you, but I decided to let it go, him go. So raising them in large numbers is hard to do well, and there are people, there's a whole spectrum of opinions on this. you know, from never, you should never raise a single one to you should raise 1 million to help the population. I'm sort of in the middle on that. So if you do it well, it doesn't hurt them. But you shouldn't do that because you want to save monarchs. You should do that because it's amazing to watch a monarch develop.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
basically, to do it well, you just keep them clean and enough food and in natural light conditions.
Okay, beautiful. I think we could probably sit here all night peppering you with questions, but I'll pause there. I still have the questions that were asked later on that we'll get to maybe at the end, but I want to be able to keep us going in your presentation as well.
All right. Good. So that was a longer part of the presentation. And now, so that was a really cool, like, earwig wing part of the presentation, how amazing monarchs are. Now we have the sad part of the presentation. Monarch numbers are declining, like numbers of a lot of things. So remember I said to you that in Mexico, we know kind of how the population is doing by the number of hectares. A hectare is about 2.5 acres, covered with trees that look like the ones in the picture on my screen. Covered with trees, covered with monarchs. One of those trees could have over 100,000 monarchs in it. It is truly an amazing, it's a wonder of nature. And if you've ever seen that, you're a very lucky person. But this is what's happening to this population. So here's the area occupied over time since people from the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve, they're in a protected area in Mexico, started measuring them in 1993. Now the World Wildlife Fund Mexico is measuring them, and a lot of people are involved with measuring them in Mexico. The first year I went to study them in Mexico was this really high year, the winter of 1996-97. So I saw that, and I saw this. I was there in 2013, the winter of 2013-2014. So what you see here in this graph is a ton of year-to-year variation, mostly driven by weather. But on top of that year-to-year variation is a long-term decline that we can really measure pretty well. So it's kind of hard to see what's going on. Your eye can see this decline. What I like to do is look at decade averages. So now we have more than 30 years of data. And if we look at the average for the last 10 years, it's about 2.8 hectares. The 10 years before that, 3.4, before that, 8.5. But really what we have is in the last decade, we don't have a continuing decline. We sort of have fluctuation around a mean. The decline occurred in this decade. You can see the decline here. And before that, it was fluctuating around a higher average. And scientists, using a technique called population viability analysis, have said that what we need is a population that fills up 6 hectares in Mexico. And you can see in the last 2 decades, we've only hit that 2 years, and we almost got there in 2005, 2006. So we are not at a population that has a good chance of long-term viability. So this is what's going on with the population. So what we wonder is what happened? What caused that decline from a high period of stability, decline, and now we're in a low period of stability? Well, probably what caused that decline was something that happened starting in a little after 2000. And luckily in 2000, a whole bunch of us went out into corn and soybean fields all over the country and in Canada. And we counted how much milkweed was in those fields and if monarchs were using it. And what we estimated, because if you've ever been in the upper Midwest, you know most of the land is covered by corn and soybean fields. That's what our land is, except little bits of land in between those corn and soybean fields. And we estimated based on the number of milkweed plants in these rows, these are milkweed plants in rows of corn, this is a milkweed plant in a soybean field with a female laying an egg on it. By looking at the density of milkweed in these fields and the number of monarchs on that milkweed, we estimated that 50 times more monarchs came from corn and soybean fields than came from natural habitat. And that habitat is gone. That habitat that hosted most monarchs, the vast majority of monarchs, is gone due to the use of, due to herbicide tolerant crops, or what was initially called Roundup Ready crops. Now these crops are tolerant of a lot of other herbicides, which mean that the farmers can spray herbicide after the crops have emerged. And here in this bottom picture, you see a little milkweed plant. They came up for a few years. They kept trying to come up, and now they're basically gone from corn and soybean fields. So we know what we have to make up for it to get back to where we were before. Now, we can't really blame the farmers. They don't want weeds in their fields. They used to cultivate their fields, and milkweed could just come right back. If you've ever known from weeding milkweed in your garden, it grows right back. So that's what happened to monarchs. There are other causes too, but that's the big one that caused that big decline. And I just want to have a little aside here, because I love all butterflies, not just monarchs. It's not just monarchs that are declining. It's monarchs that we understand more about. So there was a really interesting paper published by several butterfly biologists that was published in March of this year. And this paper, you can Google it. It's in the New York Times. You can just say New York Times butterfly numbers. And what's cool about this is you can type in where you live, and you can see butterflies in your area and how they're doing. So I typed in Madison, Wisconsin, and we can see different butterflies in Madison, Wisconsin, and how they have done over the last 20 years from all of these butterfly monitoring programs that I showed you on that big busy slide. So it's not just monarchs that are declining, but it's just monarchs that we understand so well. And what we know from a lot of modeling studies is that breeding habitat loss, I already told you about that, insecticide use, and hot, dry weather are associated with lower monarch populations. Climate change models predict more hot, dry weather. I put an asterisk after insecticide use because we actually don't have, we know that insecticides kill monarchs. There are a lot of studies that show that, but we do not have good data on how much insecticides are used. If a Mosquito Joe or some company is coming out and spraying homeowners' yards, or homeowners are buying their own insecticides, there's nobody keeping track of that. So a lot of the our ability to understand the impacts of insecticides is we don't have that ability because nobody's keeping track of insecticide use. But we do know almost every insecticide, unless you're specifically targeting like mosquito larvae in a lake, those are broad spectrum insecticides that kill everything, all insects. So we know what's driving their decline. How do we help them? So that's how I'm going to end, on the positive note. Now, so what I like to think about is the different opportunities for us to create habitat for monarchs. And one of the ones that a lot of us can do is anywhere there's lawn, we could take out that lawn and put in habitat. So this is what we call our urban suburban spaces, can be rural too. It's just changing lawns. This was my house in Minnesota before I moved to Madison. Unfortunately, that is now back to a lawn. So that was kind of depressing to see that. It's the first two owners kept it, but the last one didn't. But there are a lot of monarchs using that yard. Unfortunately, this is what a lot of lawns look like. And this is, these lawns are covered with an invasive grass, Kentucky bluegrass, which is not native. I took this picture in Michigan, and I didn't think to look at that little yellow sign in that yard that you can see in the middle there, but my guess is that it said something like this. So the only way you can make your lawn look like this is to put pesticides on it that kill weeds, kill insects, whatever. So I just went for a walk 2 days ago and took these pictures of signs that are basically saying that stay off of this lawn because it's toxic, because somebody sprayed it. So that taking away habitat from monarchs, and we don't have to do that to our lawns. So I just moved to a new house in Madison, so I just want to share my fun story that I'm making a native plant garden in my yard. I don't know if you guys can see the sign over there. That's my answer to the you can't walk your dog on this lawn. I just made those. If anybody wants one, I have a few extras. And then you can see the native plant sale. So this is a native plant garden, doesn't look all that great the first year because it takes a while. So I just want to show you the other side of our driveway where we planted annuals. These are not native plants, kind of like lilac, but there are a ton of butterflies using our zinnias and other species in there. If you really want to attract butterflies to your yard, these are Mexican sunflowers in the back. All of these started as seeds this year. So you can plant non-natives. These are the butterflies that we've seen so far in our yard in its very first year. So you can do it in your yard. Okay, so that's one place we can get habitat. There's also all that land out there in between the corn and soybean fields. This is what we call a prairie strip. This picture was taken in Iowa, where there's a big push to put strips of habitat in between cornfields. It's not great because sometimes they spray insecticides, but it's better than nothing. Monarchs can use it, and you know, they might have a lower chance of surviving, but they have a chance. So there is that possibility for habitat. There's rights of ways, like roadside rights of ways, railroads, utility lines. This picture is along Highway 35 in southern Minnesota going into Iowa. We have to make sure that we don't count too much on the habitat right by the side of the road because that gets mowed. So it can be a death trap for monarchs. Even in little country roads that is mowed because the roadsides are managed for human safety, but there's often a lot of land that's available there. And then there's land that's already protected. So land that is not going to get changed into a Home Depot parking lot or something else that won't have habitat. There's land that's protected we can make better for monarchs. So this is a national grassland. This picture was in South Dakota. So nature centers, state parks, county parks, city parks, making the habitat the best we can in those areas. So here's what you can do. You can create habitat. Monarchs will come to milkweed growing in pots. So you can do container gardening and bring monarchs in. And you'll bring other things. I didn't tell you, but our zinnias, I never thought of zinnias as a hummingbird plant, but we have a couple hummingbirds that are out in our zinnias. So you'll bring other things besides just monarchs. You should not use pesticides in that habitat, especially insecticides. You can contribute to Monarch citizen science. So when you see a monarch, you can report it to Journey North, or you can, if you live in Madison, you can join us at the Arboretum or do it in your own yard, monitor monarchs for the MLMP. You can support conservation organizations. Any organization that's out there preserving habitat, educating people needs your help. So I just want to put a call out to all the organizations that will take your money and do really, really good things with it to preserve monarchs. So the Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance, Save Our Songbirds, Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin, Wisconsin Monarch Collaborative, my t-shirt. And any organization in your own city, if you're not in Madison. You can spread the word. So now you're an hour into learning about monarchs, you're a monarch expert. Tell your friends and neighbors what they can do about monarchs too. And then we didn't really get into climate change. Climate change is a big, complicated issue, but do what you can to mitigate that. So to attract monarchs to your yard, here's a couple things to think about. Basically, you want to think about nectar and you want to think about host plants. So whatever kind of butterflies you want to bring to your yard, you can get a nest plant for them. I'm not a huge fan of golden Alexander. I don't know why. I just don't really like it. But I found this black swallowtail caterpillar on the golden Alexander in my yard this year, so I have a completely different opinion of golden Alexander now. That there's a little black swallowtail caterpillar right there. There's a common buckeye on Joe Pye weed. So you need host plants, you need nectar plants. You can't use insecticides. Like I said, I'm a proponent of native flowers. This is a garden we made at the University of Minnesota. The white flowers and the yellow flowers in here are kinds of milkweed in this garden, but these are all native plants. They're the best to use. They're adapted to our climate. They're disease resistant. You don't need fertilizer. You don't need water. They're perennials. You can just like plant them and kind of forget about them, just weed them a little bit and make them look good for your neighbors. If you have annuals, they'll just reseed themselves. So it's a lot less work and less chemical and water inputs. And you don't have to mow it. They have incredible roots. So this picture, for those of you in the Madison area, I'm ending with pictures of Rettenmund Prairie because I love it so much. Native plants are so good for the soil. So even though the people that bought my house in Minnesota made it into a lawn, at least the soil is better after I had native plants. They improve the soil, they prevent runoff, they replenish groundwater, they sequester carbon and help in our fight against climate change. So native plants are great. So that's kind of what you can do. And I know you're from a lot of different places. You can help monarchs no matter where you are. So this map I showed you before, basically everywhere on this map, you can help monarchs anywhere. And I want to just end with a couple thoughts about that. Anywhere. So people say, well, where should we concentrate our efforts? And I don't think we should concentrate our efforts anywhere. My answer is always everywhere. So this picture was taken at some land in western Wisconsin near Baldwin, Wisconsin. It was land that was in my family for a while. It now belongs to Caitlin Nagorka, who took this picture. She works for the Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program. But this land, we changed it. It was a cornfield. It's now beautiful prairie. So it's completely restored. This was, farmed for a really long time. But you can see corn in the background. And I'm going to zoom out to a Google map of that area. Caitlin was standing where that red star is when she took that picture. Everything around there is corn and soybean fields. And she's had 123 species of birds, a ton of butterflies on that land. So you can be a little island of habitat. And, you might see more if there's good habitat surrounding you, but you can save a lot of things that are looking for habitat by having your little island of good habitat in a sea of habitat that will not support very much life. So this is 40 acres and there's another 40. This is a prairie with a woods next to it. So we had 80 acres of land and they're continuing to manage it really well. And then I want to also say that the importance of habitat everywhere is we can look at a couple climate maps. So this is a climate map. This is a drought map from 2023. And here you see it doesn't look the same all over the country. So in some places in Wisconsin, we were in extreme drought in 2023. In other areas in Wisconsin, we weren't. The Northeast had just a completely benign summer in 2023. So there were more monarchs coming from the Northeast that year. So we can't just put all our habitat in one place because some years that one place is not going to be great for monarchs. So this is 2024, 1 year difference. Look at how different. Here, I'm going to put the other map up. So look at the difference in these 2 years. We had Ohio and West Virginia had terrible, terrible drought in 2024. They didn't have any drought in 2023. It was better in Wisconsin in 2024. So we need it in both places. We need that habitat everywhere.
Nope.
So the other thing I want to point out is the importance of habitat down here in Texas. Unfortunately, in 2024, monarchs had to go through Texas on their way to Mexico, where it was really, really dry. 2024 wasn't as bad. So this shows you how things can really change from year to year and how weather drives monarch numbers. Hot and dry is not good for them. So I'm going to end with this quote, which I just love. This is from a great book called Miracle Under the Oaks. And I think it's just like a great call to arms for those of us interested in conservation. So I'm going to read it. No longer content to try to hold the line in an often losing attempt to protect nature, conservationists are at last moving from the defensive to the offensive. They are striking back, and restoration is their tool. Restoration makes it possible to go beyond preserving what remains of nature to re-expand its reach. So we need to preserve those prairies. This is not restored land. This is Retmund Prairie. It's this little beautiful, amazing remnant of prairie that's left west of Madison. It's important to preserve areas like this so we can see what used to be there, but it's not enough. We need to re-expand the reach of nature. So we can answer some questions, but Brent, I want to give you time to talk about the tagging first, and then we'll go on.
Sure.
You
Okay,
said
great.
I could have till 8:15.
Yes, absolutely. You have 1 minute, so maybe let's do one question to fill up that last minute. So there were a couple questions about habitat loss in monarchs' wintering grounds on account of logging OML firs. Is that can you describe a little bit more about that and how much that contributes to monarch declines?
Yeah, so great question. When we do the modeling, so we look at all the factors we can measure and we say how that affects monarch numbers. There is a signal of the habitat available in Mexico. But what's important to realize is Mexico there is still some logging that goes on, but it's drastically curtailed. So the main driver of monarch numbers is what we're doing up here in the breeding grounds. It's certainly important to protect those sites in Mexico, but that is pretty much happening. We need to keep it or try to restore it. There's a lot of work restoring that habitat in Mexico. But when we look at kind of the math and the drivers, the big drivers are up here. So we need that habitat, but the Mexican government and the people living there are doing a good job of protecting it with the help of a lot of people from other parts of North America. So I can just point out that we can leave this up for a minute. These are different organizations I talked about. Monarch Joint Venture I mentioned briefly. The Monarch Butterfly Fund is an organization that people can donate to in the US to support conservation in Mexico. So that's one organization. I also mentioned these other ones. So there are some websites there that you can jot down, and we'll share them later.
Awesome, thank you. So really quick, we're just going to switch gears for a moment to talk about monarch tagging as a way for you to be able to do something in person that's really fun and another form of citizen science for monarch studies. So this is a photo that was taken at our Goose Pond Sanctuary in southern Wisconsin. And basically monarch tagging is the process of catching monarchs, applying a tiny, almost weightless sticker to a really particular part of the monarch's wing, and then releasing that monarch. The monarch continues its migration, and then there are scientists and paid volunteers in Mexico that are trained to look for these tags and report the tags that are, or the monarchs that are spotted with tags on in Mexico, and they report that back. So this is done through an organization called Monarch Watch, which is out of Kansas University. And basically the goal is to study where monarchs are coming from, how that changes over time, when and how quickly they're migrating, and then also likelihood of reaching Mexico and a number of other things. In addition to the scientific benefits, it also comes with a lot of cultural benefits, and some of that has to do with people in places like Wisconsin, where my organization is based, and the amazing experience of being able to see a monarch close up, and in some cases to hold it. So it's a really awesome experience and a great way for people to get engaged in conservation in a unique sort of way. And it's also a great way for people to just be out in nature in general and to be running through the prairie like a kid with your monarch or your butterfly net, trying to net a monarch. So it's really a lot of fun. It's a great way for people to get involved. And I want to show you one other photo here. This is what it looks like when the tag is applied. So in the process of catching the butterfly, we have trained volunteers that pull the monarch gently out of the net. We place the tag on this really particular part of its wing, which has shown that in the process of tagging it and afterwards, that there is no harm done to the butterfly. And then we write down all the data about the tag and the date and the time and who tagged the monarch, what species or what gender the monarch is. And then in addition to those things at Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance, we also track what type of plant it was nectaring on so that we can get some good information about what they prefer during their migration time. So Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance does monarch tagging. This year it'll be on September 6th, 10th, and 13th. I think that's Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday. But there are also other places in Wisconsin and beyond that you can do this. So if you just Google monarch tagging in Wisconsin or New Hampshire or wherever you are, you'll find a place that hopefully is near enough to you that you can participate in this. And I really encourage it. It's a really memorable experience for adults and kids alike. So with that, I'll just switch back to Karen. Feel free if you want to put any other slides up, or maybe you just want to, we can just leave the slides down and answer some questions.
Yeah, why don't we just do that? I've been typing answers to some of your questions, but I'm going to answer Jessica's question, Jessica Montez.
Okay.
You asked about gender determination, and I was typing it, but it's a great question. So it's determined genetically, like us. It's determined when the sperm fertilizes the egg. And that's what I studied sperm, monarch sperm, for my PhD. So I know a ton about monarch sperm. But the eggs are fertilized right before the female lays them. And the female stores sperm in her body. So from one mating, she'll get thousands of sperm, and she stores them in her body and uses them as she lays an egg, or the egg moves down the oviduct and it gets fertilized, and she lays it. But what's interesting, we know in people and mammals, we have XY sex determination. So males have 2 different chromosomes, X and a Y, and females have 2 X chromosomes. In butterflies, and interestingly birds, it's the females who are XY and the males who are XX. So it's determined differently. I mean, it's still genetic, but it's the females are the ones that are what we call heterogametic. So that's kind of interesting. True of birds too. Who knows why?
That's really cool.
Yeah, it is really
I just read a book with my son about how the sand temperature determines sea turtle gender as they hatch.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
mean,
really cool how different species have different approaches.
it is. It's just amazing. And turtles are like they're vertebrates, and they have, most of them do have that. So I'm just going to go down the questions. I don't know, we could even save these questions, and I'm happy to answer them that we don't get to. But Claudia, you have a really good question, Claudia Almeida. If we cut back milkweed to get new growth, does that negatively affect monarchs knowing when to start migrating? So a lot of people are interested in cutting back their milkweed because monarchs do prefer new growth. So if you cut back your milkweed and it's a wet enough summer for the milkweed to actually grow back. Some years, if it's really dry, it won't grow back. So it's a little bit risky to cut it back. But you will get more monarchs laying eggs on it. Whether that actually leads to more eggs being laid, you know, it might be they're just coming to that milkweed and not laying on your other milkweed. So it's an interesting strategy that some people do to help their monarchs. If you know, it might just be they like that better. You know, it's like if you give a kid, or if like it's kind of you have a variety of foods, and if there's something you really like, you're going to go to that. But if it's not there, you're going to eat other food. So that's probably what happens with monarchs. We don't think they lay more eggs because there's that milkweed available to them. Whether it messes up their migration is an interesting question. Their main cue is still day length, so that's not changing. It could make them go into diapause and migrate a couple days later, but it's probably not going to completely mess it up. So what we used to do sometimes at this site we studied at Minnesota, we'd mow some of the milkweed and leave other of it. And yeah, it's kind of a fun thing to watch. Do east and same question, Claudia. Do east and west populations ever cross over to the other side? Yes. People have tagged monarchs using the methods that Brenna was just telling you about. Have tagged monarchs in Arizona, and they can tag monarchs at the same site. Some of them go to California, some of them go to Mexico. So we know that there's that genetic interchange. So I like to say the Rocky Mountains are not like the Berlin Wall of monarchs. You know, it's porous. And I once stepped out of the airport in Denver, high up in the mountains, and a monarch flew through the parking lot. So there are monarchs up there where we show the dividing line. We don't even know what population, you know, where that monarch was going that I saw in Denver. Wow, somebody saw 1,000 monarchs an hour migrating. That's so cool, Denise. Isn't there an issue with Florida monarchs spreading OE? All right, so there's a disease that monarchs get called OE, Ophiocystis electrosclera. This is a disease that females transmit to their offspring. It's on the outside of their bodies. And when they lay an egg, the spores from this parasite get transferred to the surface of the egg and to the milkweed leaf, and the caterpillar eats its eggshell and eats the milkweed, and it ingests the spores. So it's usually transmitted from mothers to offspring. But in places like Florida, where there are monarchs breeding all year round, I didn't really talk about that because I only told you the big picture story, not all the little details. There are monarchs breeding in Florida year round. So this butterflies, a whole bunch of butterflies will use the same milkweed plants. And when that happens, the offspring, if a female lays a bunch of eggs on a leaf, some of this, if she's infected with this parasite, the spores come off her body onto the milkweed leaf. It might be another female's caterpillars that eat that leaf if a whole bunch of them keep using the same leaves. So you do get spread of this disease if milkweed doesn't die back, like it doesn't along the Gulf Coast. That's another issue with monarchs breeding in the wintertime. So there's just so much interesting about monarchs. Yeah. Anne Marie raised monarchs with elementary students. There's nothing like a kid watching a monarch butterfly. It's magical. I've done it with a lot of people. Somebody says some men working on a sewer line save monarchs. So yeah, everyone likes monarchs. Yeah, so you're getting, yeah, we answered some of these. Love the prairie. Oh, Anne Marie wants a sign. Contact me. So you can find me. I'll give you a sign. Let's see. Were there any, Brenna, that you saw I'll just type my email address in the chat for you. K Oberhauser@WIS.edu. So feel free to contact me. But I'm going to be out of the country for 2 weeks starting on Sunday. Let's see.
I think that was most or all of them that I was going to relay to you.
Yeah.
Mary Ellen just asked about down at the bottom of the chat. She picked, or she, let's see, I missed a spot here. Saw a butterfly lay 3 eggs, 1 on each leaf. I picked the leaves, kept them moist, but only 1 egg hatched. Were the 2 others not fertilized? What do you think?
Yeah, so Mary Ellen, if you pick those right after they were laid, they probably weren't fertilized. So it happens, like that system in the female doesn't always work. Sperm might have been bad, or the female just laid them too fast and they didn't get fertilized. So definitely females will lay infertile eggs. If you pick them a while after they were laid, it's possible a bug or a mite or something pierced that egg and killed the monarch inside of it. So we can't always tell what killed them. It could have had a parasite in it. So we don't always know, but definitely not every egg hatches. Most do.
Great. Well, I think I do want to mention that after this presentation is done, tomorrow I'll send out an email that has links to the recording of this email, as well as the other 2 presentations in the Mighty Migration series, and a number of resources that were mentioned tonight and that folks are asking about. So if you're looking for links that were in the chat, don't worry, you'll get them tomorrow, or if they weren't included in the chat, you'll get those too. So I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I hope you learned a lot. I know that I did. I always do when I listen to Karen, and that you're feeling really excited about ways that we can work together to create habitat for monarchs in neighborhoods and parks and schools and natural areas, wherever and everywhere that we can find. We encourage you to share this information with your family and friends, because we need all hands on deck for this work. And together we can make a really big difference. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Karen, and happy migration.